Ajay, really good having you. Thanks so much for joining in. So much to talk about with you.
My pleasure.
But I'm starting off this conversation with an open-ended, loose question. Amongst all the things that have happened over the last 3 months, politically and on the macroeconomic front, from the RBI and the government, what's stood out the most to you?
So I think the two big things that are happening is that we are moving forward towards a monetary policy framework, which is a huge development in 78 years since the creation of the Reserve Bank of India. And the second is that we are moving into implementing the FSLRC. This will be the foundation of a proper financial system for India. So these are the two huge things that have happened in the last few months.
Okay, let me come in with a third thing of my own, if you will permit me, before I talk about the other things as well. The opinion on the Make in India push has been divided. A lot of people believe it's too long in gestation and therefore let's not make too much of a noise about it. And there is a camp which believes that such experiments or such moves are meant to be long-term in nature, just that the fact that he's laying so much of emphasis on it is a great push for India. What would your view be, and how soon could the benefits, if any, start to trickle in?
Make in India is a good and important slogan, but we should understand that there are very clear reasons why people have chosen not to make in India, and those reasons have to do with the goods and services tax, with the labor law, with the problems of infrastructure and land acquisition. So if Make in India will be a slogan and an organizing principle around which we mobilize policy work on these underlying problems, that will be just great. If we think of Make in India like an ad campaign, then it's not going to buy us much. So I would deeply support the projects of building a clean, perfect, high quality GST, the project of building a proper framework for infrastructure investment in the country, the project of reforming the labor law, and of fixing the Land Acquisition Act. These are all great and important projects. So I think of Make in India as more sloganeering, but to the extent that it gives us a push on the actual policy work, that will be just great.
Ajay, just taking a leaf out of that point that you were just making, even the equity markets had built in a lot of expectations, a lot of sectors were holding out as to what the Modi government is going to do, for instance, for the infrastructure sector. What is it that you're expecting in terms of reforms for various sectors, especially infrastructure, and how do you think the government is going to go about implementing those?
Well, I'm a frameworks guy, so I like to solve problems at the root cause. There is a quick fix approach to infrastructure which has its place of picking a few stalled projects and getting rid of those problems. And the way we stand in India right now, that is a problem. But there is a deeper frameworks problem. We need to set up sound regulatory frameworks in infrastructure. For example, you can't get investment into railways as long as you don't have an independent railways regulator. We need to clarify the relationship between TRAI and the Department of Telecom and the private telecom companies, and so on. So there's a whole bunch of long-term frameworks that have to be done. And then there is a huge problem of infrastructure financing. From 2002 onwards, we got the first wave of infrastructure investment in India. And quite frankly, it was completely mishandled on the question of financing. We were not willing to do the long-term difficult stuff of setting up a proper financial system. So we loaded up infrastructure financing into banks and into foreign currency denominated debt, and now we are paying for these sins. Not only do we have a problem in the infrastructure sector, we have a problem in the banking sector. So it's important to not do this short-termism. It is important to lay long-term frameworks. We need a proper bond market. We need to fix the problems of capital controls and currency hedging. And these long-term issues cannot be put off. We have to go solve them.
Okay. Now, Ajay, 2 or 3 things out of what you've written for the past maybe 3 or 4 months, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but one of the things that I was referred to by my analyst today morning as well is about your thoughts on the big development, the 4 task forces for implementing FSLRC. And I also read that you mentioned that with these 4 in motion, the only one completely new component in the architecture where there is no progress is FRA. How crucial do you think this is over the course of the next couple of years?
So, FSLRC is that kind of fundamental transformation that I've been talking about, where you take one sector, the financial sector, and really fix it. These are not short-term fixes. This is a deeper long-term fix. Justice Sri Krishna always pushed saying that we should be building the financial system that will work for the next 30-40 years. So it's not solving an immediate point of pain. And one part of this is the law, that Parliament has to enact the Indian Financial Code. The second part of this is the institutional machinery. Now, you could wait for the law to be passed and then take a couple of years to build the institutional machinery. It is a very significant development that the Ministry of Finance has turned this upside down and said, we will start building the institutional machinery for FSLRC now, so that we will do the hard work of setting up organizations, processes, IT systems, and be there ahead of time, so that when Parliament passes the law, we're fully ready to go. And look back into the past, this is how we have done stuff in India. SEBI was built 4 years before the law came. The new pension system was built before the law came. NSDL, the depository, was built before the law was passed, and so on. So this is the good project management way to do it. And it is very significant that these 4 task forces have begun. It's not the whole problem. As you mentioned, the FRA is completely new and has not been done. And even on the things that are not completely new, a lot of work remains to be done. So I don't want to act as if these 4 task forces fully solve the machinery for FSLRC. But it's a big step forward.
But then the point is, and my knowledge on this is limited, but if indeed the law takes a slightly longer time to get passed, it will essentially be the same thing. Twiddle your thumbs till you get an opportunity. When do you think the Parliament gets into the act as well?
So there is a legislative process that is working in parallel, where Ministry of Finance is hearing views and criticisms of FSLRC, will come out with a modified draft of the Indian Financial Code, will table it in Parliament. That's a completely separate process, and that is where Parliament comes in. About the new institutions, one of them, the Resolution Corporation, will have to twiddle its thumbs. It will be ineffective until the law is passed. It will be like SEBI from 1988 to 1992, where you have a shiny agency, but it has no powers because the law has not been passed. But the other 3 can actually be quite useful even right now. For example, the FSAT is a better process engineering of the SAT, and potentially SAT could voluntarily choose to use some of the computer technology that is developed for the FSAT. Similarly, the FDMC is an e-filing system for information from financial firms. Potentially RBI or SEBI or IRDA could choose to voluntarily adopt this right now. Similarly, the PDMA is the investment banker for the government. The Ministry of Finance could voluntarily assign its investment banking work to the PDMA. So there is a potential that 3 out of the 4 institutions can be useful and will not have to twiddle their thumbs if the institution building work goes faster than the legislative track.
Ajay, a couple of things, and I really want your views on how you've read them. What about the Supreme Court verdict on coal block deallocation? Do you think it's going to hurt industrial growth? And what do you expect on how the government is now going to go about resolving the coal sector issues?
I'm not an expert on coal, so I cannot answer the second part of the question.
Sure.
I would just use this as a prop to remind us of that deeper problem. When we don't set up long-term frameworks, we can get into horrible problems. So, look back at the 2G scandal. We thought it was short-term, it was expedient to get along with doing some messy, quick infrastructure work because we want to get infrastructure rolling. Look at the kind of mess it gets you into. Similarly here with coal. What we should have been doing is setting up long-term frameworks for private sector participation in coal mining. We looked for short-term solutions, and this is the kind of mess they lead to. Our work will grind to a halt again and again if we don't look for long-term, thorough, perfect solutions grounded in the Constitution, grounded in the law.
And what about the gas price hike decision? Because that is still pending right now. Do you expect that to come anytime soon? Because the market had been waiting with bated breath as to when that's going to come about, and how the market is going to absorb that news.
I'm sorry, that is not a field that I know about.
Okay, fair point.
Okay. Ajay, I have a micro question, and I believe you've written about it as well. The ARC norms that were revised. I know we are jumping from institution to institution, Supreme Court to the government to the Reserve Bank as well. But I just want your views there, because everybody was betting very big on the ARC industry, and some of the views that we got once these norms were revised were of skepticism to disbelief to saying that, hey, it's good for the long term. How do you view these moves?
I'm very uncomfortable with the entire regulatory strategy that has been taken for the ARCs. We have almost mechanically got into the mindset of regulating everything. I would like to think of ARCs like private equity funds. There's a bunch of sophisticated investors who are pooling money, and the ARC is investing that money. So the first point is that you don't need regulation, because there is no consumer protection problem, there is no prudential regulation problem. So you should just back off. There is no need for RBI to meddle in the working of the ARCs. The second key failure was that we are very motherly in banking regulation. RBI always cooperates with banks to hide bad news. What is needed is an outright sale where a bank sees that a non-performing asset is sold in an auction for cash, where say a 100 rupee asset is sold for 50 rupees. And then the bank has to recognize the 50 rupee loss, and after that the bank is out of that asset completely. We have always been unwilling to recognize these losses. We want to hide them through one piece of creative accounting after another. So RBI came out with a complicated framework where the bank would sell the asset in exchange for pieces of paper, and the pieces of paper would not be recognized in the accounting of the bank as having lost value, and some years would go by and nobody would be the wiser. And this is just profoundly wrong. We should not be motherly towards banks. We should recognize bad news when it hits you in the nose.
Okay. Ajay, you know, the sweet problem of having you is that even half an hour is not enough for doing a full-blown discussion with you. But we really value these 15 minutes that you spent with us. Thanks so much for taking the time out and giving us small snippets on some of the things that could be done right. Thanks for taking the time out today.
Thank you.